The first thing Charlie Corvus did when the airlock cycled open was check his bootlaces. Not the pressure seal, not the O2 readout on his wrist display. His bootlaces. The left one had been coming loose since Lagrange Station, and he was not going to take his first steps on an alien world and trip over his own feet. Mission Control could watch him do a lot of embarrassing things. He'd already provided ample material during the 7-month transit. But not that. Corvus, we are reading nominal pressure differential. You are clear to proceed. That was Ewan's voice, flat and clipped from 400 million kilometers away, delayed by the 17 minutes it took light to make the crossing. Whatever Ewan was saying right now, Charlie wouldn't hear it for another quarter hour. It was a strange kind of freedom, operating that far from anyone who could actually stop you. He stepped out. The sky was the wrong color. He knew it would be. He'd looked at 10,000 photographs. He'd run simulations. He'd even done a color theory module in the pre-mission psych prep that was supposed to help humans process unfamiliar visual environments without instinctive alarm responses. None of it helped. The sky was butterscotch and faintly pink at the horizon, and it sat on the landscape wrong, the way a filter sits on a photograph, present but not quite earned. The regolith was rust and sand. The wind made no sound he could hear through the suit, but the dust moved, fine red curtains shifting across the ground. "Nice boots," said a voice behind him. "Doctor." Sasha Okwu stepped out of the airlock behind him, her instrument pack making her look like a brightly painted turtle. She was the mission scientist. She had 3 doctoral degrees, a publication list that required its own document to summarize, and she had spent the last 7 months categorically refusing to be impressed by anything. She'd found the gas giant flyby adequate. She'd rated the first confirmed dark matter observation as interesting. Standing now on the surface of Mars, she tilted her head and said, "The iron oxide color scatter is actually slightly more orange than my models predicted." Charlie checked his bootlace one more time. "That's all you've got? Give me a moment to run spectral analysis." "We're on Mars, Sasha. I'm aware. We are on actual Mars." "Corvus." She turned to look at him through her visor, and something crossed her face that she was trying very hard to suppress. Her jaw worked once. Then she said, very quietly, "I know, that was enough. They had been supposed to be 4. The mission roster had always read 4. The habitat module was configured for 4 bunks. The food packs were portioned for 4. And somewhere in the training archive, there was a team photo with 4 smiling faces. But Renato Diaz had gone into cardiac arrest during the 2nd month of transit, a congenital defect that had somehow slipped through 3 rounds of medical screening. And they had watched the man they'd spent 2 years training with go still in the medbay, while a certain on Earth told them, with 17 minutes of transmission delay, what to do. By the time the instructions arrived, Renato was already gone. They'd buried him in space, which meant they'd ejected the sealed body bag from the waistport at 030 while the others slept, because there was no ceremony dignified enough, and no time to invent one, and because grief was a luxury when you still had 6 months of flight ahead of you. Charlie had not talked about Renato since. He talked about almost everything else. The mission logs would show that Charlie Corvus, backup systems specialist and, as his crewmates had pointed out more than once, primary morale maintenance unit, had logged approximately 4 times the verbal content of either of the other crew members during transit. He talked about the food. He talked about the music he'd found on the server, arguing at length for the superiority of certain obscure recordings over others. He told stories about his sister, about the terrible apartment he'd lived in during training, about the time he'd nearly washed out of the program because he'd had a panic attack during a suit pressure test and hadn't told anyone for 2 days. He had been informed by the mission psychologist during pre-flight screening, a natural astronaut. He was a natural talker who had wanted very badly to go to Mars. He'd gotten there. He was trying to feel it properly. Commander Ibra Farouk emerged from the airlock last. He was a compact man with a deliberate economy of movement that Charlie had always found faintly intimidating. Like watching a chess player who never touched a piece they didn't intend to move. He stood in the hatchway for a moment, looked at the sky, looked at the ground, looked at the horizon. "All right," he said. "Let's work." They'd been on the surface for 19 hours when Sasha found the signal. She found it because she wasn't looking for it. She was running a subsurface density scan as part of the standard geological survey, cataloging the layers of the Hellas Basin rim that spread out east of the landing site. and the anomaly showed up as an interference pattern in the low-frequency return. Something beneath the regolith was absorbing and re-emitting at a frequency that had no geological explanation. She ran the scan 3 times. She ran a diagnostic on the equipment. She ran the scan a 4th time. Then she sat very still in the rover for about 90 seconds, which was the longest Charlie had ever seen her do anything that wasn't productive. "Ibra," she said, "I need you to look at something." The something was a cavity, roughly 12 meters down, extending approximately 40 meters east to west beneath a low ridge of wind-blasted rock. The signal coming from it was biological, not geological, not chemical artifact, not interference, biological. Something down there was producing organic molecular signatures in a repeating pattern that Sasha's models could only interpret as metabolic process. Something down there was alive. "We don't have drilling equipment for 12 meters, Ibra said. "I know. We have the sample borer, rated to 3 meters in standard regolith. "I know, so we wait for the next supply window, which is 14 months. Sasha's voice was very troll-told. "Yes. I know." Charlie looked at the scan readout on the rover's screen. The signal pulsed, slow and deep and steady, like something breathing. He thought about Renato, which was not a thought he'd intended to have. He thought about the 7 months of crossing, and the FFAX portion for 4, and the body bag at Eero 300. "What if," he said carefully, "we didn't wait?" The thing about the ESA drone, ART-T, the Europeans called it, Autonomous Research Terminal, which was the kind of name that made Charlie feel better about the human species, was that it had been sitting in a holding orbit for 3 months, waiting for its own mission window, and it had a drilling array rated to 20 meters. ART was not a competitor, technically. The Mars Accord of 2031 had established joint scientific protocols for all signatories, and the UNSA mission that Charlie and his crew were part of had formal data-sharing agreements with the ESA program. In practice, the two programs had spent the previous 4 years engaged in a politely vicious race, driven by political pressures that neither set of astronauts had any particular interest in, and ART's holding orbit had been established specifically to give the Europeans first crack at subsurface sampling in their designated survey zone. Sasha's scan location was not in ART's designated survey zone. It was in the shared scientific commons, which meant any signatory mission had first access rights based on physical proximity and operational capacity. ART had a 20-meter drill. ART was in orbit. Charlie's crew had a 3-meter borer. Charlie's crew was on the ground. "If we start boring now," Charlie said, working it through out loud, "and we document every centimeter, and we flag the location under joint access protocols, then by the time ART can deorbit and reach this position, we'll have established primary survey presence. They can drill alongside us. We document the discovery jointly. Nobody loses anything." Ibra was quiet for a moment. "That's not the worst idea you've ever had." "I have had some bad ones. Yes, the Fattery incident. We don't need to. The time I reprogrammed the habitat thermostat. I'm just establishing a baseline." Ibra looked at the scan. The signal pulsed. "Start boring." They worked in shifts, which meant 2 of them on the drill at all times, and 1 in the habitat, sleeping or eating, or sitting very quietly with their thoughts. Charlie's thoughts were not good company, so he volunteered for extra surface hours, and Sasha, who seemed to have entered a state of transcendent focus that Charlie recognized as her version of joy, matched him hour for hour. The regolith came up in core samples that Sasha cataloged with religious attention. Dust, iron oxide, trace chlorite, more dust. At 2.3 meters, they hit a stratum of compressed mineral aggregate that slowed the borer and required manual percussion assist, which meant Charlie lying on the ground and hitting a rod with a hammer in a way that the mission designers had probably not envisioned as a primary drilling technique. At 2.7 meters, Sasha looked at the core sample and went quiet. "What?" Charlie said. She held the sample tube up. The contents were the standard rust red of the Martian subsurface except for a thin vein near the bottom that was not. It was dark, almost black, threaded through the regolith like an ink stain. Sasha ran her field analyzer over it and read the output 3 times. "Polysaccharide," she said. "Simplex." And she paused. "Structured. Charlie, this is structured, like a cell wall, or the remains of one. This isn't just organic residue. This is something was here, recently in geological terms. Very recently." "How recently?" She did the calculation. "Decades. Maybe less." They sat with that for a moment. The wind moved the dust in slow curtains across the ridge. 400 million kilometers away, 17 minutes behind them, the Earth turned without knowing. So it moved, Charlie said. Or it retreated. From us? Sasha looked at the scan readout, where the biological signal still pulsed at 12 meters. We've been here for 22 hours. We've been broadcasting radio frequency telemetry since we entered orbit. We've been drilling for 11 hours. She paused. If I were trying to avoid something, I would move deeper, too. Charlie stood up. His back ached from the hammer work. He was, by any objective measure, not the right person for this mission. He was backup systems. He was the contingency. He was the one who talked too much and had once reprogrammed a thermostat as a joke. He looked at the ridge where the biological signal waited at 12 meters, slow and steady, and he felt something he couldn't name but recognized. He'd felt it during the body bag at 0300. He'd felt it in the training room when he'd come clean about the panic attack to a panel of evaluators who had every reason to cut him loose. He'd felt it during the 7-month crossing when the ship was quiet, and the only thing between him and the void was a few centimeters of hull and his own particular stubbornness. So we go slower, he said. They went slower. The protocol, once Sasha formalized it, was methodical to the point of ritual. Before each drilling increment, they broadcast a standard scientific telemetry burst on low frequency. Not communication, not designed for communication. But Sasha noted that any organism sensitive enough to detect their drill vibrations would be sensitive enough to distinguish regular pattern from irregular. Regular patterns were not threatening by almost any biological logic. Regular patterns were the heartbeat of the universe. She said this very seriously, and Charlie did not make a joke because she was clearly right. They drilled 1 centimeter at a time. They paused. They broadcast. They waited 30 seconds. Then 1 more centimeter. At 4.1 meters, the signal changed, not dramatically. Not in any way that would have registered without Sasha watching the readout with the intensity of someone disarming a bomb. But the pulse rate shifted. From 1 cycle every 8 seconds to 1 cycle every 6. Like a resting rate becoming an alert rate. Like something, far below them in the cold dark, raising its head. Stop drilling, Sasha said. Charlie stopped. They broadcast. They waited. The signal shifted again. Not the pulse rate this time, the frequency. A slight harmonic change, barely detectable, that the analyzer flagged as anomalous. Sasha stared at it. It's responding to the broadcast, she said. You're sure? I'm sure it's responding to something. The only variable I changed is the broadcast. She ran the comparison. The harmonic corresponds to. She stopped. Started again. The harmonic is a partial match to the broadcast frequency. It's not an echo. The amplitude is wrong for an echo. It's... She looked up at Charlie. For the first time in 7 months and 400 million kilometers, Dr. Sasha Okwu looked like she didn't know what to say. Charlie keyed his calm. Ibra, you need to come outside. They transmitted the data to Earth in 3 consecutive burst packets, flagged Priority Alpha. 17 minutes later, Mission Control's response came back. Not UN's flat voice, but Director OC himself, which meant someone had pulled him from sleep, which meant someone had read the preliminary data and understood what it meant. OC said, confirm your biological signal readings and stand by for protocol consultation. 17 minutes later, Charlie said, confirmed. Standing by. 17 minutes after that, we are convening the scientific advisory panel. Recommend you maintain current observation distance and limit drilling activity pending guidance. Ibra, read the message. Read it again. That's going to take at least 72 hours, he said. Yes, Sasha said. The signal is still active. Yes. Charlie looked at the borehole, looked at the ridge, looked at the scan, where the pulse had settled into a new rhythm. Slightly faster than baseline, slightly irregular, like a heart rate after mild exertion, or like something that had heard a knock on its ceiling and was now listening. He thought about the right thing to do. He thought about protocols and scientific ethics, and the weight of this particular first contact, which would be the most important thing that had ever happened in human history, by roughly any measure you cared to apply. Then he picked up the broadcast unit and sat down next to the borehole and started talking. Not transmitting, not formally. He just held the unit near the opening and talked. The way he'd talked for 7 months through a transit that should have broken him. The way he'd talked in a training room while a panel decided whether to cut him loose. The way he'd talked in an empty habitat module at 0300 while his crewmates slept. Hi, he said. My name's Charlie. I know you probably can't understand that. I'm not sure you can hear me at all, or what hearing even means for you, or Honestly, I don't know what you are. Neither does my colleague Sasha, which is remarkable because Sasha knows most things. He paused. We came a very long way to be here. We lost someone on the way. I don't know if that means anything to you. I think it might. I think the fact that you moved away from us when we arrived means you have an opinion about your own continued existence, and anything that wants to keep existing understands loss, even if it doesn't have a word for it. The wind moved the dust. The pulse continued, slow and slightly irregular, at 12 meters below. We're not going to hurt you, Charlie said. I know that's exactly the kind of thing something would say if it was going to hurt you. I don't have a way to prove it. I'm a person who came a long way to meet you, and I would very much like to keep doing that if you'll let me. He stopped talking. Sasha was looking at him. Ibra was looking at him. They were all looking at the readout. The pulse slowed. Not to baseline, not to the original 8-second rhythm. It slowed to something longer, more deliberate. 12 seconds, then 14, then settling at around 11. Like something choosing, slowly, to be less afraid. They stayed there for 6 hours. Charlie talked mostly. About nothing in particular. About the transit, about the food packs, about the music on the server. At some point Sasha started describing her subsurface scan methodology, which was the most boring thing Charlie had ever heard, and which seemed, based on the signal data, to have a measurably calming effect. Ibra said almost nothing, but he stayed. When Mission Control's protocol consultation came back, a 47-point framework developed by a committee that had never been 400 million kilometers from home. Charlie read it carefully. He agreed with most of it. Some of it they had already done, intuitively, by accident, by being human. Point 19 was, maintain non-threatening acoustic presence during initial contact phase. He showed it to Sasha. She made a sound that might, in someone less controlled, have been a laugh. The signal never came to the surface. They stayed for another 14 days, the end of their surface window, and whatever lived at 12 meters stayed at 12 meters. And the data they sent home was enough to rewrite every textbook on planetary biology and astrochemistry that had ever been printed. The pulse remained. It varied in response to their broadcasts in ways that Sasha's models could not fully explain, and that she documented it with the meticulous joy of someone who had finally found a problem large enough to be interesting. On the last day, Charlie sat by the borehole alone. In the early part of the Martian morning, when the sky went from black to that particular wrong color orange, and the shadows were long and cold across the rust-colored ground. He didn't say anything for a while. He watched the scan readout on his wrist display, the slow pulse of something alien and persistent and, apparently, patient. Then he said, "We're leaving tomorrow. Humans will come back. A lot of them. I can't promise they'll all be as well-intentioned as I'd like them to be. Some of them are going to want things from you that you shouldn't give. Some of them are going to be afraid of you, which usually makes people stupid." He paused. "But some of them are going to be like Sasha, which means they're going to want to understand you so much that it overrides everything else. And some of them are going to be like Ibra, who just shows up and does the work and earns his place by being steady." He thought about it. "And some of them are going to be like me, which probably seems like bad news, but I want to argue that it isn't. People like me, we talk too much, and we're afraid of things, and we're not actually the best at our jobs, but we came anyway. That seems like it should mean something." The pulse at 12 meters continued. Charlie checked his bootlace. Still good. He stood up, took one last look at the ridge and walked back to the habitat. Sasha was awake, running her final data consolidations. She didn't look up when he came in, but she said, "The harmonic signature varied twice more in the last hour. The second variation had a repeat structure." "How long is the structure?" 11 cycles. He sat down across from her. She was very carefully not looking at him. He was very carefully not making a big deal of anything. "Is that significant?" he asked. She took a breath. "The number 11 is not significant in any mathematical framework that has anything to do with their biology or their environment." She paused. "My best guess is that it's a count. Of us." Charlie thought about that for a while. 3 people in a habitat on Mars, 17 minutes from home. Something at 12 meters, counting them. Knowing how many there were. Knowing possibly that the number had been 4 and was now 3. "Sasha," he said. "Don't," she said. "I'm just going to say one thing. I know what you're going to say. It knows we're here." She put her stylus down. For a moment the only sound was the wind against the habitat wall, the slow hum of the life support recyclers. The distant low frequency of the signal broadcast they'd left running, the heartbeat of them, regular and non-threatening, reaching 12 meters down into the Martian rock. She said, "It knows." That was enough.